From all of your perspectives, how do we distinguish a company that's trustworthy versus not? And this is going off of, again, building off of, are there other tools that companies could use outside of something like the Ranking Digital Rights Project?
I'll be happy to start. So I think it is important for individuals that they do make an effort to understand what a company does, what the company's business model is, that they do make an effort to look at the privacy policies, to at least understand what may happen to their information as they're using a service of a company. At a certain point, of course, it's the individual's own responsibility to say whether they want to use such a service or not. The unfortunate reality is, as Pania highlighted and as I mentioned earlier, is that it is generally just difficult for individuals to get that knowledge, meaning the knowledge is communicated in an incomprehensible manner. The knowledge is often simply not existent, meaning it is not presented, the company doesn't publish it. So there is a gap there. So we can all try, and individuals should make the effort in as much as they can, but there is a lot of responsibility on companies' shoulders as well to make sure that users have that ability to make those choices, to be able to distinguish between companies and between services.
As you can probably imagine, as a company that's trying to build or define a new way of building internet services, thought long and hard about this question and then researched it a lot. So here's the challenges I found. Plenty of tools to confirm that you're compliant with the law. And they will do internal privacy assessments and those kinds of things, PIAs. But to me, the law is a low bar and doesn't cover all the issues. So is that sufficient to assure my customers that I'm trustworthy of their data? It's better than nothing, but it's not a sufficiency on its own. So then I looked around and I found that privacy by design is referenced by the GDPR, and there is an organization trying to build a certification tool around that and to certify that you've built your product fundamentally private by design. But that doesn't mean it's trustworthy either, necessarily. So again, insufficient. Better possibly than the law, compliance with the law, but still insufficient. So then I looked into doing it myself and thought, okay, what we'll do is we'll bring on a board of directors whose responsibility it is to act on the behalf of my customers and empower my customers with the ability to do what I think somebody asked on your question session was, do that internal audit. I've got a question, I want to know internally what's really happening. The trouble I found there was that if I put them outside my company, I couldn't invest in them the appropriate legal rights over my company to access that information. If I put them inside my company, then a problem I then found was how to remunerate and support them in a manner that doesn't undermine their independence of operation. So, long story short, there is no answer as far as I'm concerned. Yet, but I'd love to find one.
Do we have any other thoughts? There's another really interesting question that I'd actually like to ask.
I'll answer the pessimist.
Yeah.
There's a pessimist here. He
Okay.
says that I don't see why companies should do it if they can't make money on this. I'm just asking, 30 years ago, would you expect any companies to be green and make money on it? I believe it's exactly the same. That now it's worthwhile being a green company. And we'll see this in the future. It will be worthwhile taking care of your data and giving you control over your data. And it will be a minority, very little minority in the beginning, first movers, consumers who will demand this, but they will be wealthy and powerful. So we'll see it, but it will just go slowly. And that's why a lot of companies like Lego, they are not bragging about this today, because they're afraid of getting the same reactions as the green companies did 20 or 30 years ago when they bragged about being green. The journalists came after them and said, well, you're not green enough, you're just saying you're green, So it's a slow movement.
Yeah. I can't agree more to that. So also having the picture in mind that I showed before, right? I think currently all the service providers are still in this mode, personal information is an asset. I have to keep it for myself, and I have to monetize it, right? I think when the first platform will come out and show that also with transparent way of using personal information, letting the user to decide also to opt in and opt out, they will reach a totally different level. And once one company does it, I think this trend of being transparent and trustworthy is about to break through.
So,
well, I sort of agree and disagree. There's plenty of companies that have tried to do a private version of Facebook. Didn't work, right? Why not? I don't know, because everyone's on Facebook. Well, apart from me. So at one level, you know, it's clearly not a sufficient differential asset. That said, I do believe that if the next generation of products that innovate in the new spaces, innovate in a manner that's built upon a company that's fundamentally trustworthy and fundamentally privacy respectful, they'll have a much stronger position in the market, a much more sustainable business proposition than any other company, because it's not easy to build a product that's fundamentally privacy respectful and fundamentally seeking to be trustworthy. And that slows the entry for anybody else who wants to take the quick shortcut, grab the data, monetize it up the wazoo, and give the VCs a 3-year return on their investment, which frankly is most of the models that are out there right now. So that doesn't mean to say that I don't agree with Pernille as well, in as much that I think we are seeing the beginnings of the average consumer getting frustrated with the nature of the way the internet is operating and seeking answers, but not to the point where they understand the questions necessarily, but just wanting to know that when they engage, that they're being respected properly and their data isn't being abused or used in ways they don't understand. And we've got to find ways to get innovative about making that customer experience so natural and as part of the product that it doesn't become a separate question. I mean, we have an app and we don't make a big thing about its big privacy aspects, because as far as I'm concerned, most customers don't actually care enough, unfortunately. But what I can do is build a product that is fundamentally private and is fundamentally seeking to be trustworthy. And if we innovate properly in our space and we get adopted, then we're in a secure space.
yeah. Now, I think there are a couple of really interesting concepts coming up here. One is you just touched on this concept of sustainability, and as the web matures, how do you build companies that will last over time? And there was a comment here in the question saying not being trustworthy tends to show in time. And again, I think this actually comes back to this concept. If you really market yourself as something, increasingly, you better be ready to be vetted for it. So I actually do know, and this is just anecdotal, but many people who, if a company is so strongly marketing themselves as ethical and as green, they think, well, they probably are, because otherwise they're really exposing themselves. But so now I would like, and there's also a comment here about how being green and buying products is something that some people cannot afford, which brings in another concept, which is, are people going to think that things they have to pay for are more trustworthy? And I would like to turn to this last set of questions before we wrap up with the lessons learned. This concept that, again, coming to perceptions, to marketing, to people putting labels on something. Trust is a feeling, and most people aren't going to go back and read privacy policies. Trust is something, people have a reputation, you feel good about it, and you trust it or you don't. So there are a couple of questions here that I would like you all to kind of touch upon one by one. First is, trust is a feeling. Couldn't I just use effective marketing to appear trustworthy? And how does it help to be trustworthy if nobody knows that I'm trustworthy? And also, is trust blind? How to establish trust against some kind of body or person that says, trust me. This must require information, like following the money trail. So if I could get one last comment on this idea of trust as a feeling and the concept of marketing yourself as trustworthy as it becomes a bigger priority, and then lessons learned.
All right. So yes, of course, trust is a feeling, and it's difficult to grasp that, and it's difficult to sort of say, okay, this is exactly what we should be doing as a company or as a consumer in order to get that match. I think the other challenge is that for many individuals, as well as for many companies, the trust part only seems to come up after an incident. Right after a data breach, after having to send out an embarrassing email asking you to reset your password that you may have used a few years ago that you may not recall if you've used it for other services, etc. This is something that is, makes it difficult for trust to be built and for trust to be sustained. So I indeed can only encourage companies to be proactive in that sense, to make it clear how they can be trusted, in what way they can be trusted, and in that sense involve consumers in that process as well. I think that is one area where it's generally lacking. I'm sure there's a bunch of user testing happening around these sort of issues, but there isn't much user involvement in these issues. There isn't much engagement, gathering of community feedback, community input in decision-making around these issues. And I think if you want to give people a feeling that they can trust you, then you should empower them to make these decisions for your company as well, since they are the end users of such products.
And sorry, I'd like to make one quick plug in there. The lessons learned, people have been listening below. Go ahead and start scrolling through now also and vote ones that you particularly like, and they'll float to the top. Sorry.
I think the way the media mostly deals with trust, certainly in the UK right now, is it seems to be directly correlated to security, which I think is very unfortunate. A company is trustworthy if it hasn't been hacked, and it's untrustworthy if it has. Very simplistic perspective, but essentially that's what the media is focusing on. And so is our government, by the way. They just put 1.9 billion into innovating security, as if security suddenly allows the internet to operate in a better way, which, as I said, time undoes it anyway, and it's an arms race. So, okay, the UK wants to get ahead of the arms race, so what? Good to do, great foundation, but it's not about trust. So I think we have a bigger issue that we need to find ways to communicate to our customers what trust really is. And like I say, it's not about being trust. It's a binary condition that doesn't exist. Trust, you can only seek to be trustworthy as a company. What I would say, though, is that what we've got to do is look at the tools that we can use and try and find ways to communicate those to customers. One of the ones we use is data minimization. I think there's so much data, so much activity going on, that if we cut down how much data we use to deliver our service, that means we can much more readily inform our customers and engage them properly in a consent process. And if we do those things, then they become more informed, they become more aware, and they will then be able to use things like the GDPR to properly empower themselves to do something. If we don't follow principles, which is in the GDPR, like data minimization, which isn't explicitly enforced, unfortunately, if we don't do that, and then all we're going to do is deluge the average citizen out there with so much information, they'll just switch off. And we've got to make it really easy for them to switch on to trust.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can say something because I really like the question. Trust is a feeling. You know, trust has multiple layers, but this question should remind us that it's about the product. If you buy a Coke and pay with your credit card, you trust in many different multiple layers. First of all, you trust that the Coke will taste just like the last time. That's a different kind of trust that you have towards the credit card company, that everything will go smooth and the transaction will be just $1 you paid for the Coke. And when we talk about data, the challenge is data is not really visible. The use cases are maybe. And we come from an energy company, we had the same problem many years. Electricity is not visible. How do you generate trust? But you know what the funny thing is? People trust their utilities because they provide secure infrastructure. So we believe the key to generate trust in a data-based environment is to provide safe infrastructure. People will use the infrastructure and trust you that it functions right. But you cannot build a business just on trust. You need to have a great product, and then people will trust that in general it works out. I give you one very good example where they didn't care. When Sony was hacked, you know what the people cared about? The only thing they cared about, and it's proven, you can Google it, when is the PlayStation network back up again so I can keep playing? They didn't care at all about where the credit card information went or if it was theirs that was actually exposed. They cared about playing again. So you have to really listen to your customers to understand in which area they really want to trust you.
And let me add something to this. I think what's also very important is trust is on many layers, totally agree, but trust is also a feeling that is built. So you have to repeatedly prove that you are trustworthy by giving transparency and control and proving case by case that you are a trustworthy partner, and then over time also trust will grow. So I think you can't fake trust with effective marketing because that would be only the first layer. then you have to, of course, prove that you are trustworthy. Other than that, you won't never be a trustworthy platform or provider.
Can I respond to 2 other questions?
Very quickly.
Very, very fast.
1
yes,
minute. Yeah.
privacy is for the rich, just like buying organic food was. Less and less, fortunately. More and more can buy organic food. And that's and I also want to say about Apple, that yeah, I don't know if you can trust Apple in the long run, but I do believe you can trust them right now. They're actually really seriously working with differential privacy. And I know you're lifting your eyebrows, but we have to live there. Who can we trust in? I actually do trust Apple as I see it right now. But you never know. You never know.
Thanks. And I'm quickly, thank you all for voting and ranking some of our lessons learned. We're going to go over them. I'll just read some aloud. So this concept of the privacy principle, companies are only custodians of data. It's your data in the end, as Jeff Roville said. Companies should agree that they're just temporary custodians. Thank you for trusting us with the privilege of being the custodian. The idea of true privacy by design. We should have sharing settings, not privacy settings. So again, this concept that privacy should be baked in, and then the sharing aspect should be where the consent comes in. Personal data is the core competitive advantage of the current big internet giants, and there need to be new tools to communicate trust. And one of the only times that privacy, when there is agreement around what privacy is when it is breached. In this concept that if you have to have a privacy setting, you've already failed. And I think that we need to wrap up now, but please feel free to keep ranking if you so choose. These lessons learned will remain, and thank you all very much for a wonderful panel. Round of applause.